We're discussing part 2 of Sakura no Kuni. This is part of Fumiyo Kouno's manga Yunagi no Machi Sakura no Kuni. So, if you look at the cover images of each of the parts. So the first one was Minami, the second one was young Nanami, and the third one is Toko. Because in many ways, this is, while Nanami's story again, it's also a lot to do with Toko, because it's because of Toko that Nanami actually follows her father, and that Nanami is actually able to come to terms with a lot of things, as well as for Toko as well, because her relationship with Nagio is something that hangs in the balance. So her trip to Hiroshima becomes a way for her to come to terms with her feelings and to give her the courage and the confidence to be able to hold her own in such an equation. So it's a very important thing that that she is on the cover for this as well. Now, this section is set in 2004, so again, time has passed. And again, baseball continues to remain the continuing conversation. This, by the way, has a lot to do with the fact that baseball is really popular in Japan, which may have something to do with the US occupation. So again, it's a product of historical events itself. And while they are watching the baseball match, Nanami and Nagi are also playing rock, paper, scissors to decide who's going to do the chores, because that's what siblings do. And while all of this is happening, we have Nanami tried to sort of have a conversation with her brother about their father's strange behavior. Apparently, he's been going off by himself. He's not been telling things to them. And so she's really worried that her father is turning senile. All right. And she's just like, I don't know what to make of it. Like, he's acting so strange. Like, what if something's wrong? And, Nagi's like, what if he's got a girlfriend? Like, you don't know. I mean, so many years have passed. That could have happened. But she's just like, yeah, funny and everything. But we don't know. He's retired. Maybe he's becoming senile. And we also understand through their conversation that Nagi was a doctor. And it is Nanami who supported him on his journey to become a doctor. So we also see a lot of, it's also obvious why that must have happened, because for someone like Nagio, losing his mother, losing his grandmother, knowing that he comes from a family of hibakusha, this must have been quite a burden on him. So to want to, and for the fact that he himself spent a great deal of time in a hospital, it's like, yeah, I think this is what I need to do with myself. So it's really interesting. Now, she has a conversation with her father, and he does seem very distracted. So you almost think like, oh, there's a good reason for why, she's so suspicious of his behavior. All right. And just before the scene where the father goes off on one of his journeys, she talks about beaches, which becomes really important later because we see what is really happening to these beaches that she's been buying. Now, Nanami wants her brother to come with her, but her brother seems to be out of it, which we realize has to do with his equation with Toko. The fact that they have sort of broken up, and that's really what's taken a toll on Nagio. And similarly, we realize that the father is not so much a senile as just going off to Hiroshima to sort of, interact with people and just do it on his own because he doesn't want the burden of informing his children. And the father is truly suspicious because you have panels where he's literally taking a bag that he's hidden in like a bike, and he's just sneaking off, and you're just like, what is he up to? And it actually lends itself to a lot of humor as well. There are moments of humor, especially when we see her follow her father around and see him meet people, and they're all women, and she's just like, oh my god, what am I seeing? But there are good reasons for why that actually happens. Now, just to backtrack, to come back to her, she follows her father to the train station, and there she runs into Toko, and Toko wants to tag along. So you can almost see it mirroring part one, where when Nanami decided to just go to see her brother and bring him cherry blossom flowers, and she runs into Toko, and then Toko joins her, and then they go on this little adventure. We see the same thing, except this time it's a much longer journey because they're going all the way to Hiroshima. And you can see that Nanami is a little awkward around Toko, and that is something that we understand after they sort of board the bus, and they've sort of settled into that trip. And for Nanami, it's like she remembers her past, and that's not something she's very comfortable with, because we see the narration where she says, "I wish I hadn't run into her. Her clothes, her hair, they gave off the sunny fragrance of our old neighborhood with the streets lined with sakura trees." And the thing is, we have to remember that as far as Nanami is concerned, Toko is a reminder of a time when her life was still happy because her grandmother was around. Like, she may have lost her mother, but her grandmother was around, and so there was a certain kind of stability to their life. But with this, like, she had to shift. It's a kind of loss, that it's a traumatic experience, because it comes with the loss of a person, and then it comes from a physical separation from a place that can be very, very traumatic for anyone to experience, and definitely so for a young child as well. So she is awkward, and you can sort of make out through that conversation, though. For Toko, she sees her and she immediately recognizes her, as we mentioned before, because the two siblings do look quite alike. Now, we have Nanami slip into her past. And it's interesting because, excluding the panel of Toko fixing her hair, which is clearly a panel in the present, all the other panels next to it are panels in the past, and you can see them. The background is shaded with black to both indicate it's a past event as well as to indicate that it's a traumatic event. And it is traumatic because she's addressing her grandmother, and her grandmother doesn't recognize her because her illness has progressed so badly. She doesn't recognize her, so she's just like, "Who are you?" She's like, "Grandma, it's me, Nanami." "Oh, a friend of Midori's?" "I'm sorry, Midori hasn't come home yet." And we know Midori is her youngest daughter, the daughter who never came home, the daughter who never survived. And that must have been a really heartbreaking thing. I mean, even if she's someone who's not spoken about it, not discussed it, not commented on it, it's a grief that has stayed buried in her heart. And now when her illness has progressed so badly, it's something that's coming to the fore. And we understand where Fujimi is, but for Nanami, it's such a traumatic thing that my grandmother doesn't recognize me, and she thinks I'm her daughter's friend. It's really heartbreaking. And so you see the dark shading in the background continue for all the past panels, and the moment it's a present panel, again it goes back to white again. And also look at the questions that Fujimi asks Nanami. Those are so distressing because, "And you, where were you? How did you survive?" It's like, why did my daughter die? Why did you make it? It may sound like a really selfish thing to say, but it's a very natural human response for anyone to make. Because on one hand, you may feel guilty for surviving, like Minami felt. But on the other hand, you're also like, "But I survived, so why didn't I survive fully?" That's a natural response to have. And we see Nanami in the present, all right, and we see her in that same, in the clothes that she's worn to sort of hide her identity from her father, with a cap and everything. And we see her arms stretched out. Now that's a really interesting scene, because the last time we saw characters' arms stretched out like that and uncovered, it was Minami with her scars on her hand. either in the bathhouse or later on when, we see her body holding the handkerchief that Uchikoshi had given. So the hand representation is really interesting, because the other thing is that we also hear from towards the end of part 2 is that Asahi says that you remind me of my sister a lot. So there's a lot of physical similarities between the two, between the niece and the aunt. And also the fact that, and that's also sort of being, that juxtaposition is also happening through the mangaka's art itself, because she's placing both of them in similar positions, but there's a difference. Minami's arm had scars. Nanami doesn't have any physical scars, but she does carry a lot of emotional and psychological scars because of the same incident itself. Now, they end up in Hiroshima and they're following her father. And as mentioned before, every door that opens, there's a lady over there, and then he goes in and meets them, and then he steps out and then goes and meets another lady. Honestly, for a third person looking, it looks like he's having many, many affairs, which can be really scarring for a daughter. Worse still, because the daughter has her friend coming with her who's also seeing her father do this kind of behavior. That can be strange, but contextually, they're actually Minami's friends. In fact, the first person looks a lot like Furuta, the person we met in Yunagi no Machi. And so it's very clear that all those people that he meets, the women he meets, as well as the man he meets later, could be Uchikoshi. So they're basically all of Minami's friends, everyone who Minami knew back then. But for poor Nanami and Toko, they're just like, what are we seeing happen? And which is why, again, you have Nanami pour water on her head to cool her head, because she's just like scandalized at what she's seeing. It's of course only later she figures out what's really happening, but it's a little scandalous for her. And so, which is why Toko and she part ways, and Toko goes off to the Peace Museum. Now, the Peace Museum is actually a monument to the atomic bomb survivors. It records a lot of aspects of the bombing itself. So it's a very important monument of Hiroshima. It's also not a very easy place to go to, because the history that it records is quite dark and quite traumatic. But Toko decides to go there, and when she returns, she falls sick. She throws up. She's so uncomfortable because it's a really distressing experience to undergo. And we already know from part 1 that Toko is very empathetic, because seeing Nagio on the hospital bed, she doesn't think twice before she tears out her favorite music sheet and gives it to him. So that shows that she's a very empathetic person. Similarly, the fact that she was studying in a college that did not have a medical program, but she actually left that place, joined another place to take up medicine. It may not have been because she fell in love with Nagio, but because she was so moved by that experience that she wanted to do something. So, very, very reflective of that. Now, Nanami follows her father and finally ends up in a cemetery. Alright? And if you notice, a lot of the dates on that cemetery, which is, by the way, true if you were to go to Hiroshima as well, a lot of the dates on the cemetery, the year is 1945, because a lot of them died around that time. And sometimes a whole family grave, multiple people must have died in 1945, and just 1 or 2 people may have lived a little longer. So that's a reflection of it. And we also see the beaches. Right, so you finally know what happened to the beaches that Nanami bought. The beaches are a very popular, maybe that's not the right word, it's a very common offering made to the dead. So usually when people go to visit a cemetery, visit their family grave, they usually carry peaches because peaches are seen as an appropriate gift for someone who's passed on, and it's seen as an offering for the gods or for the ancestors. So we see that over there. So we finally understand what happened to the peaches. And we come to the Hirano family grave, and it's 1945, 1945, 1945. And that's Tenma, Midori, Kasumi. And look at the ages, 41, 12, 15. And then 1955, Minami, 23. And then 1987, Fujimi, 80. And it's heartbreaking. We pass by scenes of Hiroshima streets. We see the Genbaku Dome in the background, so it has been preserved. As discussed when we were doing Yunagi no Machi, we spoke about how it would been destroyed during the bombing, and a lot of people actually wanted to like raise it to the ground, like, you know, let's not have any physical reminder. And then a few people were like, no, let's maintain it, and that happened in 66. So since then, people kept it as a reminder of the bombing as well as the survivors. So we see it now in 2004, it's still there, which means it remains a memorial to the survivors. We see Asahi meet a person. That person could be Ichikoshi, could be. I mean, considering that's the only male person that he's met, considering he's meeting his sister's friends, it begs reason that it could be, you know, Ichikoshi itself. And he's sitting down at this place and he's talking to that man. They share a meal, and that's when Nanami, you know, searches for Toko's phone number to call her, and she comes across a letter from Nagio to Toko. And then she sort of understands everything, why Toko came, why everything happened, why her brother was so quiet and cut off when she spoke to him that time. It's because Toko's parents have told him not to come and meet Toko anymore because, you know, they are afraid that he might be hibakusha. And like I said, logically it doesn't make sense because Minami and Asahi didn't grow up together, which means Asahi did not experience a bombing. But Asahi's wife, Kyoka, who we are going to be introduced to now in the story, is a hibakusha. And so that could be a reason why they're so afraid that Nagio could be hibakusha. And which is why it's like, he's like, you know, I get it. I can't expect you to give up on your family. Family is so important, just like mine is to me. But it is what it is. And so Nanami also understands why she wanted to come, why she wanted to be a part of this journey, because it's equally for her to come to terms with her emotions, for her to understand if she has the guts to stick through with this person, as well as to reconnect, you know, with Nanami. Now, we see the panel of the father sitting at that corner, and the very next scene is of him sitting in the same place, but now it's the old atomic slum. So the atomic slum was actually converted into a green belt because people felt that, you know, one, we need to raise those structures, the shanty town, because we don't need those kind of physical reminders. And on the other hand, turning it into a green belt may also help revive that entire space. So we are now stepping into Asahi's memories, where he is a young man returning to Hiroshima. He wants to stay with his mother, and he's able to reconnect with her through Kyoka, who's this young girl who helps Fujimi as an assistant, as an apprentice. And this young girl is the one whom he later marries. Now, of course, she looks really young, so you're just like, 19-year-old, 12, 14-year-old, seems a little problematic. But honestly, it's not a romantic relationship in the beginning. It's something that manifests itself into romance eventually. And also, we are told that Kyoka looks small for her age because she was caught in the flash. So, assumedly, this may be in the 60s, probably. Um, in which case, it's, yeah, about 15 years from the bomb, probably. So, even though she looks so small, she may actually not be that tiny after all. And there is some awkwardness for between Asahi and Fujimi because he's reconnecting with his mother after so long. But at the same time, Kyoka's presence really changes everything because her being there helps him, eases the conversation between them. All right, and we see subtle, hints to the past because when Asahi says, "You have a good apprentice, mother," Fujimi's response is, "Yes, my daughter was all thumbs." And the next thing is her walking away because at the end of it, it hurts, right? Because she lost her daughter who had been with her for so long, who she thought survived, but didn't. And we know from Yunagi no Machi that Minami was all thumbs because she really couldn't make anything, and Uchikoshi did, you know, did get flustered by the whole thing. But yeah, and we are also sort of introduced to another aspect of what a war can do to people because the disconnection that exists between Asahi and Fujimi is very natural because he's not lived with his family. He's lived apart. He talks unlike them because that's why Kyoka is like, "You don't sound like you're from here. Your surnames are not the same. How are you actually related? Why are you calling her mother? Like, why are you being so familiar with her?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, if we are, it's just that, it's circumstances." And it may seem like such an unnatural thing, but it was kind of like an inevitability during wartime. Families did get split apart, either by death or because of destruction. They were forced to live in different places. So those things were unfortunately inevitable. Now, we see Asahi meet Kyoka when she's returning from school, and we see that Kyoka has been beaten by her teachers because she's too slow. And so when Kyoka says, "When I was a baby, I got caught in the flash, that's why I'm so slow." And you see, Asahi is someone who does not enjoy that kind of a statement because he's like, people are too quick to blame things on the bomb. Because he's like, yes, it is a horrible thing, but that doesn't mean that everything has to be determined by that. Because if we only understand our life from that framework, that also doesn't help us move on. And that's also a problem. Right? So he's like, no, we have to see it in perspective. Of course, one could say that he has not directly experienced bomb, but he is intimately connected with it because his family has been affected. So it's not like he's completely isolated from that. So he starts to tutor her and they obviously become really close. He builds a relationship with Kyoka's brother, Motoharu. So there is this whole equation between them. And those memories we see to sort of distinguish between the past and the present. The borders of those panels are kind of like hazy, or a little not sharply made, and all the present panels are nice and sharp and dark to sort of indicate this is the present, that is the past. And when Toko and Nanami meet, Toko throws up. Like I said, the Peace Memorial can be a very intense experience. Most people may not find it very easy. In fact, it also reflects Fumiyo Kouno's own experience of going to the Peace Memorial when she was a child, because she was also deeply affected by it. Even though she doesn't come from a hibakusha family, ideally anyone who feels even a modicum of empathy would feel deeply distressed in such a space. So anyway, the father goes out there, not able to follow him, and instead they take refuge in what clearly seems to be a love hotel. Okay, this is uh, this is a feature of Japan, where you have these love hotels where couples can sort of get together. And unlike most places, these hotels have like a bath inside, because as we discussed before, homes may not have a connected bath, which is where people use the town bathhouse. But uh, these love hotel rooms have baths connected, and they have a lot of amenities for these couples who are meeting. So because otherwise it doesn't explain why Nanami is so worked up at the fact that she's taking refuge in a love hotel, because she really looks like, oh my god, this why am I here? But it's also a place that rents by the hour, so it's convenient to book a place in. So um, again, just like in part one, we have Nanami unlocking a door. It's the same thing, but now she's an adult. And we see her remember a whole different memory. So it kind of also reminds us of Minami, who would suddenly have these flashes of the past, and it would be so traumatic for her. Like when Uchikoshi told her, oh, you'd make a great wife, and she immediately remembers all the carnage of the war, and she's like, no, that's out of the question. I'm never going to marry. So similarly here, Nanami is trying to open the door, and we immediately, in the next sheet, we go into the past, because the whole backdrop is in black. All right. And she basically witnessed her mother collapse, and that can be a really, really traumatic incident, because she's let herself in and her mother is lying collapsed on the floor, and blood is near her, which means she's really been throwing up, not unlike what happened with Minami in Yunagi no Machi as well, where she started throwing up blood. And when Nanami sort of approaches her mother, and you can see she's nervous because she's literally clutching her clothes, and it's like, mom, and her mother holds her hand, and unfortunately also puts a lot of that blood on Nanami's hand. And it parallels the very next incident where Toko touches her arm, and she immediately is jolted because she's remembering the time when her mother touched her with the bloodied hand. And here it's just Toko trying to apologize. That's it. Like, I'm so sorry. I puked, and I'll wash your clothes. Like, you can just hand it over to me. And she's like, no. I mean, like, she's embarrassed because she didn't mean to react that way, because she was thinking of something entirely different. And we have Toko address her experience of the Peace Museum, where she basically says, when I thought how it could just as easily have been my family and friends, it totally impacts her. So we realize that she's a deeply, deeply empathetic person. But Nanami's like, you know what, it's fine. Like, it's a very natural reaction. In fact, yours is a decent reaction. Most people are either too apathetic or just like, oh, this is so disturbing, and they don't want to engage with it. But she's engaging with it. That makes it very different from some other reactions. Now, again, a moment of humor. Toko tells her what she can do in the whole room and what she can find where. And for Nanami, it's just like, you come to this kind of place often. And then she remembers the letter, so she knows the person she comes with is her brother. And it's like, oh my god, I'm learning so many things I don't want to learn about my life, about my family members. And they pass by the bridge, the same bridge where Uchikoshi had proposed to Minami. And later on we see it's the same bridge where Asahi proposes to Kyoka. And we pass by the Futaba clothier. In the present scene, the panel is darkly edged and it says founded 50 years ago. In the past scene, it's much more lightly shaded. to indicate that this is a time when um, Asahi and Kyoka are much older. Asahi is clearly working. Kyoka is also finished with her studies, and she's now she wants to pick up a job for herself. And Asahi, of course, wants her to move in with them. One, to give her his mother company. Two, because he really likes her. And the panel where he has that conversation where he says, and I'd be and Fujimi's looking at him, Kyoka is looking at him. Fujimi looks at him shocked. Kyoka is kind of blushing, but Kyoka notices Fujimi's lack of response, and so she's just like, yeah, maybe this won't work. And that's why the mother's like, you intend to marry a hibakusha victim? She's like, why do you think we sent you away to be raised by others? And how would I explain this to your Ishikawa parents? Oh, why can't I die? I don't want to see any more people I know die from the bomb. Because for the mother, it's like, I've seen enough of this. I don't want to go through this anymore. Like, I don't want to have to experience this anymore. But we realize that Asahi is someone who doesn't want to sort of determine his life just by the bomb. And so he feels like, I don't think I need to let that decide everything for me. And we also have them switch back to the present, and Toko and Nanami speak much more openly. And Toko sort of say that, I was on my way to meet someone. I tagged along because I didn't have the courage to do it, but I'm going to take my parents along. So you realize she's talking about Nagio. She's talking about the fact that she's made a decision. She's going to be with Nagio. She's not going to let this decide her life. In that sense, she's not very different from Asahi itself, because she's also like, yeah, you know what? It doesn't matter to me. I'm not going to let this decide anything for me. And so Nanami decides to help her out because she decides to call up her brother and get him to meet them so that maybe these two can reunite. And while Toko is asleep, she also mentions what it means to carry the burden of being a hibakusha survivor or being related to them, because no one explicitly said that my mom died at 38 because of the bomb, and when my grandmother died at age 80, no one blamed it on the bomb. Yet people stubbornly believe that both Nagio and I could die at any time because of the bomb. In the same way, I was stubborn in wanting to forget everything that happened to me back in our old neighborhood. Because the fact is that what they're also trying to say is that, yes, the bomb happened. That doesn't mean that we don't deserve happiness, we don't deserve to move on, we don't deserve to be treated as people. Because there's a certain kind of prejudice that exists against hibakusha survivors. And so she's really saying, is that something that should be deciding our lives for us? Should we only be limited by this framework? That is something that comes through over here. Because she's like, yeah, maybe all of us deserve to move on. And in that sense, we see that Asahi is someone who's making that decision. It's going to be heartbreaking, but don't we all deserve happiness? And not for us to sort of just be like, okay, this happened, this was terrible, so we are forever going to look at these people in a certain way. It's a very important conversation because as we see in Yunagi no Machi, there no one wants to talk about the bomb. And then you have other people who know very little about it and are even more prejudiced and biased about it. So how do we sort of combat that? By having a dialogue, by having a conversation, right? And so the fact that Nanami decides to call up her brother and get him to come, it's a step towards reconciling with that entire experience. And we see that when she is in the bus, we pass by Mount Fuji, or Fuji-san, because it's a very important landmark for Japan, and so it's always just mentioned very respectfully. Now Nanami, of course, drops Toko back to their old neighborhood, and she's just like looking around, seeing everything, and we have Nagio come in, and Nagio cross questions Toko, and she's just like, dude, how can you be so rude? I literally created a situation for you. You are a nuisance. And she smacks them. I mean, we really see that Nanami hasn't changed much as a person. She's just learned to sort of suppress it, but that tomboyish energy continues to remain a feature of her personality. But we see that Toko and Nagio are sort of reconciling, and so there's a great deal of hope in this entire situation. We see the water tower, which is a feature of Tokyo. We see Nanami walking around, seeing the entire place. We also see her tear up that letter, and this is where the panel's really interesting. So the present panel, where the edges are darkly edged and firm, you have her tearing up the paper and letting it sort of blow away in the wind. The next panel is sort of hazy because it's sort of blending from the past to the present, so you can see paper and then it doesn't seem like paper anymore. And then it's completely the past, where it's now petals and they're falling all over Kyoka's face. And this is where Asahi proposes to Kyoka, and it's near the same bridge, but it's slightly different because back then when Minami was proposed to by Uchigoshi, she runs away in fear because of the trauma of those memories. But here Asahi and Kyoka, they accept it, they move on, and then they move into this new home of theirs, all right, along with Fujimi. And we have Nanami's narration. Somehow I remember these scenes from before I was born. I was there watching them, and I looked down at these two and decided to be born to them, I'm sure of it. And we have a scene of them standing on a bridge. So unlike the Peace Bridge, this is a bridge in Tokyo, and there are sakura trees everywhere blooming. And it just looks like there is every possibility that we are moving towards a better future over here. That's the indication that we get. And so the final sequence is where Nanami meets her father, and her father's like, listen, I'm not senile. I just don't want to, have to run errands for you. So I just want to do this on my own. And he also says that this year is the 50th anniversary of the death of my longest surviving sister. I visited people who knew her and asked them to share their memories of her with me. You remind me of her, Nanami. My big sister would be sad if you don't find happiness. And that final scene is actually of a train. Now, we can't say if that it's the same way if it's seen in Japanese narratives, but trains traditionally, especially in the Indian context, trains were always seen as a positive symbol, a move towards the future, a move towards better life. So even in this case, maybe it's an indication of the fact that it's a move towards better life. And the last panel is where Asahi asked if he can introduce Nanami to people from his singles group. And she's just like, why have I just been receiving so many revelations of my family? Like, do I really need all these things? But it's an important conversation because we are shifting towards the future. We know that there's every possibility that Toko and Nagio have reconciled, and with Nanami coming to terms with her past, there's every possibility that she too can move on and have a life instead of being trapped in her past. So the story, very subtly, of course it is anti-war, but it's very subtle because more than anything else, it's just about, shouldn't we just celebrate life? Shouldn't it be about everyone having a chance? And should we necessarily engage in acts of such violence that rob people of such opportunities? It's really a text that throws up those questions. So it's a beautiful, moving text, and I believe there's always possibility to read so much more into it because it's fundamentally, I would say it's a text that's fundamentally about life, about celebration of life, about people constantly wanting to live. In Yunagi no Machi, though Minami is traumatized by her past, she wants to live, and that's robbed from her, and that's terrible. In Sakura no Kuni Part 1, you have Nanami despite her experiences, and we know that she's seen her mother die in front of her or fall ill in front of her. She's had those experiences, but she's still sort of like, no, I want to live. And then finally, with her grandmother's loss, it's too much for her to take. But we see that in the third act, there is a sort of like, a closure, because she's come to terms with her past. Toko has come to terms with her feelings, and she's also found the courage to make a final decision. And that is really what the text is about. That ultimately, we have to be like Asahi. We have to remember that we can't let the traumas of our past decide everything for us in the present. So it's a beautiful text that very briefly covers that history and doesn't become needlessly melodramatic, doesn't, literally just use a lot of pathos. It manages to convey all those feelings, but very subtly, and leaves a lot to the reader to sort of draw from the text, because, like most East Asian texts, a lot of things are subtly stated. You are supposed to delve into the mind space of the character and understand them better. So I hope this really helped you gain an understanding of Fumiyo Kouno's beautiful manga, Yunagi no Machi Sakura no Kuni. Thank you.